All right, welcome to today's training, everybody. It's Jake here, CEO and founder of Imaloa. Thanks so much for clicking on the video. I'm not going to have any fancy PowerPoints like I do in the other training. I'm not going to really go through. This is going to be a conversation as close as it can be to you. Likely you are a transformational leader, a retreat host, and educator. Likely you've also found yourself in sales of some kind or influence or impact. And maybe you've seen sales as a dirty word. I've been doing it for a very long time. I started as a door-to-door salesman when I was 10 years old for Olympia Sales Club, which was like a way for me to make some cash. And then I started recognizing the tremendous impact that I could have if I could both create a business and sell. And so I started to link those two things together, and I really started to get leverage on my mind so that I wouldn't see sales as a dirty word, and also so that I wasn't using the things that I was learning for bad. I learned with a lot of real masters in the early days: Tony Robbins, Dr. Richard Bandler, founder of NLP, Susie Pearl in London, Paul McKenna, all these people who have put persuasion and influence in sales as a focal point in their career and in their trainings. And I learned a few Jedi mind tricks, and I've scaled that back now in my 30s as I've endeavored more to bridge the gap and help folks, both at Imaloa and outside Imaloa, be able to be impactful in their lives using the techniques I've learned without, again, using it for bad. So I just want to acknowledge you for clicking on the training, because I know sales might not be easy for many of you, especially if you're hosting retreats and you really just want to get to the work of transformational leadership. Yeah, so I get it. I see you, even though I'm not physically seeing you, but I understand the spirit. We've worked with hundreds of retreat hosts at Imaloa. I've talked to thousands of you. I get it. I really get it. Okay. In this training, we're going to talk about converting objections into commitments, which is pretty damn helpful. And we'll also talk about some initial distinctions in a values-based buy versus a commodities buy. And hint, you want to be a values-based buy. Why? Because then you wipe out a lot of the objections that a lot of these people who are selling commodities get. In particular, objections around price. Yeah? We'll get to that in a second part of the training. By the way, you can always email me if you need clarifications, jake@imaloa.co. Email me if you need any clarifications on this. Okay, so converting objections into commitments. The first thing to recognize, and I'm going to give you 10 steps here, but the first thing to really recognize is that likely objections are coming not from a place of I don't want to buy. Likely objections are coming as a way for your buyer to remind their ego that they're in the game and that they're showing and demonstrating that they're thinking things through, which is actually a very healthy thing. A first step to a yes is a no. I love no's. We get a lot of no's at Imaloa. Sometimes it takes years for us to convert that objection into a commitment to buy. But because we've adopted the mindset of no is just a first step to a yes, and objections are actually ought to be, well, initially they ought to be ignored. That really is step one. Objections ought to be ignored because oftentimes it's just taking ground or holding ground, people trying to work through in their heads what it is they believe as they're listening to you share whatever it is you're sharing about. Yeah, so initially, many times clients will voice one or multiple objections so that they don't seem too easy or impulsive or foolhardy. You don't have to handle every objection. Oftentimes, people don't recognize this one simple thing, that the quality of the questions determines the quality of our life. So the quality of our questions also determines the quality of our business relationships, right? So sometimes people don't know the questions that they're asking or the objections that they're giving, and it's not to unvalidate your buyer. It's just to acknowledge that this is part of the human experience. I notice it in myself when I am being sold something. And the objections I have are often not the real objections, it's the surface objections. And because the person on the other side is not particularly skilled in bringing me deeper, I often never discover what's really holding me back, and then I just don't buy. So this process is really to help your prospects in whatever form you're in, whether it's webinars, whether it's one-on-one calls, whether it's to a group in an email. It's to help them discover what their real objection is and see how you can start to get some leverage and some commitment from them on it, okay? So when you hear an objection, just continue along and assume the sale. If this brings up the same objection, Then you move to step 2. So step 1 is kind of ignoring it, or perhaps acknowledging it. I don't love ignoring because I like to validate people's experience, but to perhaps softly validate it, but don't think too much of it. If the objection happens again, step 2, listen and let them get it all out. The worst mistake that I see people do, people take it so personally that someone's objecting. Just let them talk. I will just let people talk. And then I'll ask some really good questions, but I let them exhaust themselves. And I don't mean physically. I mean like exhaust the objection, get it all out, because then you can listen for the different cues that they're giving you. Many times people will continue talking as they're listening to what they're saying. They'll realize that they're not making any sense, and then they'll answer their own objection, and then you don't have to do anything. You don't need to be the good guy, the bad guy. You can just be the facilitator and the person that sees the best in them, because that's what you want, right? That's what you want. You want to be able to see them in their best. See them in their best all the way up to the sale and the close. See them on their best on the way out. That's what we do at Imaloa. We do not force people. We base this whole process on attraction, not promotion. That means that we see the best in people on their way up to buying with us or on their way out to purchasing, in our case, another retreat center. Either is a fine option for us. So if they don't talk themselves out of it in step 2 after you've heard them out, you need to politely repeat back the objection. So if they say, the retreat costs too much, you want to repeat it back to them in the form of a question and say, it costs too much. Or even a better one that Thich Nhat Hanh used to use, not as a salesperson, but as a monk. And is that so? But that takes some real polishing, and you have to be really aligned to be able to object to someone's, or answer someone's objection and say, and is that so? So just make sure that whatever you're saying, don't take what I'm saying and use it. Take what I'm saying, recognize the value of it, and then frame it into your own words. It costs too much. Many times then they'll go on a rant and talk themselves out of it, especially if you've addressed costs in advance before, which is something, obviously, by the way, if you're getting the same objection of if it costs too much, you should be dealing with that at the beginning. The beginning of all my webinars for Imaloa, I'm like, look, we're one of the most expensive retreat centers in the world. I mean, I'm just going to be real honest with you that is what you're walking into. And we create an experience like none other. And we have 2 out of 3 retreat hosts renewing. And we have guests who said it's the best experience that they've ever had. And we have, I'll layer it up, but I'll start right with that objection. So if you're getting the same objection, I wouldn't go through the 10 steps. I would actually start to deal with that objection through your own commitments at the top of the webinar. Yes, we're expensive. And yes, this retreat ticket is $5,000. And yeah, you could find other retreat tickets that are cheaper. Here's why you won't find an experience like this. And also that starts to bridge between values-based buy and commodities buy, which we'll talk about in a second. Okay, if they don't talk themselves out of it in step 3, which is that when you politely repeat it back to them, I would encourage you and invite them to go deeper. Go deeper. Why? They'll be seen, heard, valued, and validated. It'll create rapport with you. It'll also allow you to really hear what's on their mind. Oftentimes, the it costs too much is a pain point that's below that. You just have to shut up and listen. You get to really find out what's going on and why their objection is so important to them. You can ask, how do you mean? Or, I'm sure you have reasons for saying that. Do you mind if I ask what they are? Step 5 is to always, and you should always be doing this, always validate the objection, because what you're doing is you're validating the human being. And guess what? They probably want to buy something from you because they need validation in some way, shape, or form. Validation that it can be better, validation that they're making the right decision, validation that it can be fun and exactly what it is that they can have, what it is they're wanting. I ask you to remember the phrase as well. This is really great, that if it costs too much and you're on step 5 and they haven't talked themselves out of it, the question could then be, if we could handle the price, would you want to go ahead? This is where you start to turn the objection into the commitment. If we could handle that for you, would you want to go ahead? Now, don't get nervous. Don't start getting hot like I am because there's no air conditioner in here. This is not a way for you then to negotiate. I tell people up front also, we don't negotiate at Imaloa. We collaborate, we do not negotiate. So this is not an invitation for them to think that you're going to then negotiate on price. It may be where you then really dive into the value of the product that you're sharing with them. It may be that you can offer a better payment plan if the objection on the price is really the most important. You want to validate it, but you want to also start to get the hook. You want to hook it in. I call this the hook it in. And that's when, if we could handle that, would you want to go ahead? Here's what this magical question does. They'll either say yes or, I don't know. If it's a, I don't know, you know what that means? That means you haven't gotten to the core objection. Cost is just the thing that's on the surface that they think that is running the show, but it's something deeper. Your job as a coach, as leader, coach, as salesperson, to dig deeper. I'm sorry, it's uncomfortable the first few times, but I'm going to tell you this. You're going to have a hell of a lot of rapport built with this customer if you're able to do this with a straight face. You might not do it with a straight face. I started doing this shit when I was 21. I'm 37. I've done hundreds, if not thousands, of deals in different ways, shapes, and forms. It takes time. You're going to laugh at it. You're going to say, does this really work? This is crazy. And then you're going to maybe say it verbatim, and it's going to sound really awkward, and they're going to hang up the phone. So you just keep going and going and going. Okay, if they say yes, then all you have to do is you'll turn the objection around through a question, which we'll talk about in a second. If they say no, then you can ask what would prevent us from doing it. Yeah? And then they'll begin to tell you the real objection and won't waste your time dealing with the false objection. Worst thing that I see with salespeople, they're running around. This is why I say don't answer people's initial questions, because people don't know what the heck they're asking a lot of the times. You have to get to what the core objection is. Otherwise, you're just going to be like literally running around like a chicken with your head cut off. Step 6 is to align with them and let them relax. Watch for their shoulders to relax. See their breathing by pacing them. I mean, this is like simple NLP stuff, but see the breathing and see if you can just drop into rapport with them. There's no need to jump all over the objection. You can release any tension that might have been built up in the exchange, because people also don't love being called out on what it is they're saying, because oftentimes we're not fully thinking about what we're saying until we're asked about it, and then it gets uncomfortable because then we don't have the script after we're asked about what it is we really believe. You could say, I hear that often. Many people have had that same concern. I understand, and then you can tell a story. A really good opportunity here as a pattern interrupt or to go deeper is to tell a story. I will often go into a story about someone who had a very same objection. And I'll talk about how they were victorious through that objection, usually because of me or my business. It's simple, but it's not easy. Step 7 is to turn the objection into a commitment. So this is something I learned early on with Tony Robbins. You can never answer an objection, but you can turn it into a question. So, for example, it's cost too much. That brings up a good question. In spite of, it costing too much, isn't the real question that you're not sure where to get the money. Now we're getting there. Because now you're also able to qualify, right? You then, if they don't have the money to buy, you might need to look at what your sales process was that got them into this thing in the first place. And do you need to improve your processes? Or you can start to deal with the question around money. Is it really a question around that they don't know where to find the money? Or is it something else? Are they scared to? It's usually an emotion running the show. It's usually not money. So you might say, even though you don't have the money, if you don't do this, won't it cost you more money because of the money that you'll miss out on? That's a possible way to go about it. Or how do we go about finding the money or making this make sense? Or just totally validating their experience as well. If they're not qualified to be on the phone with you, then that's a lesson for you, not necessarily them. You can still bring them down and give them more details and dip in with them. But this might also be a learning and a reflection for you. If you could get the results we've talked about, for example, perhaps they are driving towards certain results, you can name those results in the question. If you could get A, B, C, X, Y, Z results from my retreat or my coaching product, isn't that worth more than the initial investment of X? What is it worth? Like, have them decide what it's worth. Step 8 is to answer the question. Here are 4 ways to answer the question. So you can turn it around, that it's only going to get more expensive the longer you wait and the more pain that builds up. You can compare it to what they'll miss out on. You can say it's definitely not cheap. You know what it's going to cost you if you do it, but what's it going to cost you if you don't? Boom, you can answer it. You can answer it through a question. Third is you can make it seem small. Yeah, it's an investment, but when you consider you currently spend X on XYZ things, it's a small investment, isn't it? Again, if they say, well, yeah, I do spend that much money on coffee, or I do spend that much, I do spend a comparable, like find something that they're spending comparably in. And then if you get them to say, well, yeah, that's true, boom, you've converted the objection into a commitment. Another one is you could also deny it, which is not my favorite. It's not too much money compared to everything else in the market. I've got to tell you, here are 5 companies that charge more. People do use this. I'm not a huge fan of it because then it moves into a commodities-based buy. So then people start buying based on money, and that's not ideal, especially if you're a high-end offer, which likely if you're a retreat host charging $3,000 to $5,000, it's likely a mid to high ticket offer, right? I mean, high ticket offers are usually $6,000 and more. Yeah. So step 9, confirm, test, and close. At this point, you want to confirm that you've answered their question effectively, like, are you with me, or does this make sense? If they say no, go back to step 4. Well, how do you mean? Dig deeper. And these are steps in linear order, but this often, if I was able to chart out how our sales team does it, this is often happening in real form like this. It's going from question 1 to question 4. Like, you should follow the process, but human conversation, if done well, does not follow a process. What it is you come at it from the heart. You use the tools, but you're heart-based and heart-centered, so that way the hearts are connecting. That way the tools are much more effective, and we'll talk more about that in a later training. That's it. And then step 10 is just to close. Obviously, close. Get the commitment. Okay, we've dealt with that. Are you now ready to proceed? I hope this was helpful. So I hinted at the commodities versus values-based buy. A values-based buy is where it's usually a higher-end ticket offer, and the conversation is not about the money, it's about the value. The minute you go into negotiating, the minute you go into comparing yourself to other retreats, for example, is the minute you've lost them because you've put it into a commodities buy. When I look at Imaloa, there are so many other retreat centers that are so much cheaper than us. I never talk about them, and I only deal with the fact that we're expensive because we're offering a product that no one else does. And by the way, I also show the ROI of hosts that host here as compared to where other people host. So if you host at a cheaper place, great, and the ROI likely is less. Why? Because you're less likely to sell coaching programs after the retreat. Why? Because they're not in as heightened of a state as they are in Imaloa. Studies show, the data that we have shows that people who hosted Imaloa, they have an already built-in rapport with their guests because they've chosen Imaloa, because they are recognized, the hosts are recognized by the guests for having made this decision to host at a place like Imaloa, gives them more credibility than they would if they would have hosted at whatever other place down the street. So you start to establish this in a values-based buy rather than a commodities buy. Commodities buy ends if you don't have the time or you don't have the money. If you don't have the space, the physical space, and you don't have the money, commodities, done. Values-based buy, you're creating something together. You're collaborating, you're not negotiating. This is very important when you're trying to convert ticket sales, especially medium to high ticket sales. I tried to get a lot in under 20. I'm sorry that I spoke so fast. You can probably slow me down in the recording. I'm here on email if you need anything else, and I hope that you really enjoyed this session together. All right, and if you're ready to book at Imaloa, we'd love to have you. All right, thanks for listening. Bye-bye.